I love the Agile principles, but I think some of them are open to abuse, some of them more than others. Let's talk about the worst offender this week on the Badass Agile podcast. Greetings, team. Welcome to the Badass Agile podcast. I'm your host, Chris Williams. Hey everybody, how you doing? Welcome back. Last week, I did an episode on prioritizing customer value, about how that very basic Agile principle sometimes gets missed. This week, I want to talk about another one. This week, it's about welcoming changing requirements, even late in development. But first, let's take a moment to remember why we're here. To create an elite tribe of leaders who truly serve their clients and communities by doing what matters and what works, relentlessly chasing value and excellence like a badass. There's so many resources out there about what you need to do to be agile, but we're focused on who you need to become in order to lead teams. So let's hammer down those fundamentals to create a truly unique and powerful force in this industry. And remember, if this helps you, just tell your friends. All right, let's talk about welcoming changing requirements, even late in development. The second Agile principle describes Agile processes as harnessing change for the customer's competitive advantage. The philosophy behind that being, if you can pivot, if you can satisfy customer demand, as soon as you know that the demand exists, you have a much better chance of surviving and thriving in the marketplace. Simply because sometimes first to market wins. The market rewards speed. Never forget that. Here's what happens in practice, though. A couple of people take a little course, or a few people read a manual or a Harvard Business Review article about what Agile is and what it can do for your company, and they adopt this principle and understand it to mean that we can simply change requirements whenever we want, and the development process will allow that, permit that. So for this reason, this Agile principle is both a blessing and a curse, because we can use it to make our products more nimble and more responsive, but in truth, we use it to excuse sloppy prioritization and sloppy execution when we allow new requirements to suddenly be added to the pile at any time. So while this principle is important in fighting the tendency to oppose change because we've already committed to a certain course of action or a certain architecture maybe, or maybe we're just afraid to admit that we did it wrong. At the same time, we can't use that willingness to change and adapt to open the door to poor visioning, lack of prioritization, lack of certainty. And it's dangerous because in Agile, we don't prioritize upfront planning or extensive documentation. So we have a tendency to miss some of the requirements, maybe to not consult with everyone we should have consulted with, or to fail to think a particular application or experience through before designing and building it. Now, we don't want to go back to the old ways of planning and building software, processes, or experiences. In fact, we want to free our development teams up to have the first 2 or 3 sprints go quite badly, to completely miss the boat, to completely miss requirements if we need to, so that we can understand how this new way of working flows and figure out a way to get the right requirements in at the right time. So here, the ability to change has 2 major benefits. The first one, as I mentioned earlier, is to be able to get product to market more quickly, to be able to react to changes in the market in a way that makes us really nimble and fast. The other benefit is to create that real learning system where we become awesome at what we do by failing for a little bit, figuring out what's important, putting things in customers' hands so they can see it, and reacting to the changes that they require. We consider this to be the best way to gather requirements, is to build as best we can with the knowledge that we have, and let the experience of touching and playing with a finished product or experience inform what we do next. See, any process inherent in Scrum, Kanban, Lean, and so on, are purpose-built to eject what's not working so that we can reprioritize and rescope work based on the new reality on the ground. For teams switching to Agile, transforming to Agile, the perception is that changing dates and scope is still a big no-no. That's what causes the resistance. And the whole point of this second principle is to free up our minds and souls from the way that we used to do things, the things that we used to consider failure, the things that we used to consider scary or bad form. We invite those things into the process for the benefit of making work flow easier. But I think the real damage happens when we extend this principle to an environment where someone can come in mid-sprint and make a change to what they wanted, a big change, to completely stop course and switch to insert another seemingly new high-priority item. That's not what this was designed for. So we have to be really careful how we communicate what changing requirements really means. It does not mean that we'll interrupt existing work to change course or fix a problem. It can happen from time to time. It's perfectly natural that we'll make a mistake. We'll need to find some way to minimize the waste, minimize the loss, and recover. But if we make a regular practice of it, it becomes mayhem. Things become completely unpredictable. See, because the moment that a sprint is cemented, that we've got a plan for the upcoming sprint, changes to what we do become much more expensive. That's why shorter sprints are better. But when big companies do Agile, what ends up happening is they insist on 4-week sprints or quarterly sprints because it's just too difficult to release product to production. And so they then insist that there's some escape valve, some way to look at that 1 month or 3 month window, pull out things that aren't working or that we changed our mind on, and insert new priorities, new tickets, new urgencies the moment they come up. That's an abuse of the process. Instead, the right way to think of the second principle, I believe, is that we need to give customers, the business, freedom to start building something without having total clarity about what the customer will respond to and what they won't, but rather to build tangible things as quickly as possible so that they can tell us where we got it right and tell us where we got it wrong. That's what changing requirements, even late in development, means. And imagine a change that requires an architectural rebuild from top to bottom, somewhere late in the development process, a month before something goes live to the public, imagine. It's scary to think that we would have to stop and retrofit everything that we've built to match a new architecture or a new design. And that's why there's so much resistance to Agile ways of thinking and doing, because we believe that that's costly. What we fail to realize is that that's much less expensive than designing up front for things we're not sure the customer will pay for, or even worse, that they'll pay for and never use. So I want you to watch and think about how you communicate this principle to your teams and clients. This can't be a way to excuse the lazy behavior of not finishing a feature or increment of value so that customers can test it and tell you what works and what doesn't, but instead to constantly be rethinking, doubting ourselves, and shoveling poorly thought requirements down to the development team and insisting that they change now because Agile is supposed to be flexible and welcoming to changing requirements. There's a big difference, and when you know the difference, you realize that the job in front of you is one of the hardest things to do in agility, which is to know how to separate product owner, business stakeholders from your team in terms of ownership of the sprint backlog. That really has to belong to the team once they've decomposed the highest priority value items and figured out how they're going to solve it and how they're going to deliver it. Reflect on this week and look inside your team's operations and see where a misinterpretation of this Agile principle is leading your team into chaos, mayhem, disrespect, and disarray. I hope this one inspired you guys. As always, you can reach out at badassagile.com. You can find me on Twitter at badass_agile and on Instagram at badassagile. I look forward to seeing you next time, and until then, stay badass.